He lifted his glass, and the gold ring caught the light. Same lion, same ruby, same curse her mother once called a blood promise. Maria's hand trembled as she whispered, "My mother has a ring, just like yours." The room froze. His guards reached for their guns. And when the Mafia boss finally looked up and said, "What did you just say?" Because that sentence just dug up a secret 30 years dead. Sometimes, the most dangerous thing you can do is speak the truth, especially when you don't know it's a secret. If you're hooked in and want to enjoy this story, go ahead and subscribe, and drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. It's always amazing to see where everyone's watching. Plus, tomorrow I've got another incredible story lined up, and you definitely don't want to miss it. Alright, back to the story. The golden light of La Serenata cast long shadows across white tablecloths, turning the upscale Italian restaurant into a stage where power played dress-up as civility. Maria Leone had worked here long enough to recognize the performance the way dangerous men used cloth napkins and wine pairings to pretend they weren't predators taking a brief intermission from violence. At 25, Maria had perfected the art of being invisible. She moved between tables like a ghost, efficient and forgettable, exactly what men like these preferred. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe bun, her uniform crisp despite the late hour, her expression pleasantly neutral. She'd learned early that survival meant being seen without being noticed, heard without being remembered. Tonight, the usual rhythm felt different. The air carried a charge, like the atmosphere before lightning strikes. The shift happened at 10:47 p.m. The jazz pianist's fingers stuttered on the keys. Conversations dropped to murmurs. Even Paolo, the manager who'd survived 3 decades of serving New York's underworld, straightened his tie and retreated toward the kitchen. Vincent Moretti had arrived. Maria watched from the bar as he entered, flanked by silence and 3 men in matching dark suits. He moved with the unhurried confidence of someone who'd forgotten what fear tasted like: tall, lean, dangerous, in the way a blade is dangerous. His black suit was cut with precision, his dark hair slicked back to reveal a face all sharp angles and cold calculation. A tattoo crept above his collar, serpentine and threatening. He chose the corner table. Always the corner. Always with a view of both exits. "Maria." Paolo's voice was tight. "Table 7. Be professional. Be quick. Be invisible. Be invisible." The mantra of her entire life. She approached with wine and water, her practiced smile in place. "Good evening, sir. Welcome to La Serenata. May I? Chianti. The 97 Reserva." He didn't look up from his phone, his voice smoke and gravel. "Of course." At the bar, Sophie gripped her arm. "That's Vincent Moretti, head of the Moretti family." "Maria. Men like that, they're not customers, they're natural disasters." Maria poured the wine with steady hands. She'd survived worse than dangerous men. She'd survived watching her mother die with secrets locked behind her teeth. She'd survived 3 years of suffocating grief and bills that never stopped coming. She could survive one man's dinner. She returned to table 7, bottle in hand, and began the ritual. Show the label. Open. Pour. Vincent Moretti still didn't acknowledge her existence, his attention absolute and elsewhere, until his hand moved to lift the glass. The ring caught the light like a warning flare. Maria's breath stopped. Her vision tunneled. Everything else, the music, the murmur of voices, the clink of silverware dissolved into white noise as her entire focus contracted to the gold band on his right hand. The lion's head ring. Heavy gold, carved with Renaissance precision, a crimson ruby forming the lion's roaring mouth. Intricate, ancient, unmistakable, impossible. Because Maria had seen this ring before. Not on his hand, but in her mother's velvet box, the one Isabella kept hidden like contraband. The one she'd open on bad nights, when morphine couldn't kill the past. The ring inside was identical. Same lion, same ruby, same weight of history and blood. A curse, disguised as a promise, her mother had whispered once, wine-drunk and dying. Proof that some debts are written in blood. Mia cara. The words escaped before training could stop them, barely louder than breath. "Hi, sir. My mother has a ring just like yours." The world fractured. Vincent Moretti went absolutely still. His hand froze. Around them, his 3 shadows shifted, hands disappearing into jackets. The temperature dropped 10 degrees. Slowly, agonizingly, he lowered the glass. When his eyes lifted to meet hers, Maria felt the full weight of a predator's attention. His gaze was surgical, dissecting, searching her face for the lie, the angle, the trap. When he finally spoke, His voice had become something lethal. "What did you just say?" The question hung in the air like a blade. And Maria realized with sudden, terrible clarity that she'd just opened a door that could never be closed. If your heart skipped when he asked that question, imagine being the one standing in his crosshairs. Don't look away now. Subscribe before the next breath reveals what happens when a waitress speaks a secret she didn't know she was keeping. The back alley of La Serenata smelled like rain and rotting vegetables, a stark contrast to the perfumed elegance inside. Maria leaned against the cold brick wall, her hands shaking so badly she had to clench them into fists. "What did you just say?" Vincent Moretti's voice still echoed in her skull, cold and razor-sharp. She'd stammered something, an apology, maybe, or an explanation that made no sense even to her own ears. Paulo had materialized like smoke, all obsequious smiles and nervous energy, ushering her away with promises of giving Mr. Moretti space. "And the young lady is new, forgive her." But Moretti hadn't looked away, not once. His eyes had tracked her retreat like a sniper following a target, dark and utterly unreadable. "Maria, what the hell was that?" Sophie burst through the service door, her face pale. "Do you have a death wish? You don't talk to men like Vincent Moretti. You don't make observations. You don't—" "I know," Maria's voice cracked. "I know, Sophie. The ring, it was identical. Identical. To what?" "My mother's." The words tasted like copper and grief. "She had a ring exactly like his. She never told me where it came from. Just that it was—" Maria closed her eyes, remembering her mother's papery hands clutching that velvet box. "Important. Dangerous, maybe." Sophie's expression shifted from anger to concern. "Maria, honey, maybe it's just a coincidence. Rich people, they buy expensive jewelry. Maybe they got them from the same—" "No." Maria shook her head, certainty settling in her bones like ice. "You didn't see it, Sophie. It wasn't just similar. The lion's head, the ruby, even the way the gold was carved like feathers or scales. That's not mass-produced. That's legacy." The word felt right. Legacy. Heavy and old and stained with secrets. Maria's apartment was a study in calculated poverty, clean but threadbare. Everything functional but nothing comfortable. She dropped her keys on the scratched counter and moved automatically toward the bedroom, toward the single thing her mother had left behind besides medical debt and questions without answers. The keepsake box sat on the top shelf of her closet, wrapped in her mother's favorite scarf. Maria's hands trembled as she pulled it down, the weight familiar and terrible. Inside, faded photographs that smelled like dust and time. A torn Italian passport with her mother's maiden name Isabella Russo, and a photo of a woman who looked too young and too beautiful to become the hollow-eyed patient Maria had watched die. A cheap necklace with a broken clasp. And beneath it all, wrapped in tissue paper that had yellowed with age, a folded letter. Maria had never opened it. Some part of her had always been afraid of what her mother's words might reveal. Tonight, fear felt like a luxury she couldn't afford. Her fingers shook as she unfolded the paper. The handwriting was elegant, masculine, the ink faded to brown. "Isabella, mio tesoro. This ring belonged to my father, and his father before him. The lion's oath, we call it. A promise that blood protects blood, that family is everything, that some debts can never be repaid, only inherited. I give it to you not as jewelry, but as proof. Proof that what we had was real. Proof that some promises survive even when the men who make them do not. Wear it. Remember me. And if the wolves ever come hunting, show them the lion and tell them Angelo Moretti kept his word. Con tutto il mio cuore, Don Angelo." Maria's breath left her lungs in a rush. The paper slipped from her fingers, drifting to the floor like a condemned verdict. Don Angelo Moretti. She'd heard that name before, whispered in the same breath as words like founder and betrayed and murdered. The original Don of the Moretti crime family, killed in some internal power struggle decades ago. The man whose death had supposedly paved the way for the current regime. The man whose ring Vincent Moretti now wore. And somehow, impossibly, dangerously, her mother had owned the twin. Maria reached into the box with trembling hands and pulled out the velvet case she'd seen 1,000 times but never truly understood. She opened it. The lion's head ring gleamed up at her, crimson and gold and damning. "Blood protects blood," the letter had said. But whose blood was she protecting? And from whom? You've seen the ring. You've read the letter. But the real question isn't what it means, it's what Vincent Moretti will do when he realizes Maria's mother kept a secret his entire family tried to bury. Subscribe now, because the wolves are already circling. Maria didn't sleep. How could she? with Don Angelo's letter burning holes in her mind and the lion's head ring sitting on her nightstand like an unexploded bomb. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Vincent Moretti's face, the way his expression had shifted from dismissal to something far more dangerous when she'd spoken those 7 words. My mother has a ring just like yours. By the time dawn bled gray light through her curtains, Maria had made a decision. She'd call in sick, maybe take a few days off. Let whatever storm she'd accidentally summoned blow over. Men like Vincent Moretti didn't concern themselves with waitresses for long. She'd been a momentary curiosity, nothing more. The phone rang at 7:03 a.m. Maria. Paulo's voice was tight, strained. You're working tonight. Paulo, I was thinking. You're working tonight, he repeated, and something in his tone made her spine straighten. Mr. Moretti called personally. He's requested you serve his table. 8 o'clock. Don't be late. The line went dead. Maria stared at the phone, her pulse hammering in her throat. Requested, such a polite word for what was clearly a summons. La Serenata felt different tonight. The golden light seemed harsher, the jazz too loud, the air thick with expectation. Maria's hands shook as she tied her apron, her co-worker's eyes following her movements with a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. Whatever you did, Sophie whispered, fix it. Apologize. Grovel if you have to. Men like Moretti, they don't forget, but sometimes they forgive. Maria wasn't sure forgiveness was what Vincent Moretti had in mind. 8 o'clock arrived with the inevitability of an execution. The restaurant had only a handful of diners. Strategic placement, Maria realized, all regulars who knew when to look away. Vincent Moretti sat alone at the same corner table, no bodyguards visible, though Maria was certain they were close. He looked different tonight. Not softer, Vincent Moretti would never be soft, but more present. His suit was navy instead of black, his hair slightly less severe. He looked like a man who decided to have a conversation instead of an interrogation. Somehow, that was more terrifying. Good evening, Mr. Moretti. Maria's voice was steadier than she felt. May I? Sit down, Miss Leone. It wasn't a request. Maria glanced around, but Paulo had conveniently disappeared. The kitchen staff found urgent tasks elsewhere. Even the jazz pianist seemed to be playing softer, as if the music itself was afraid of interrupting. She sat, perching on the edge of the chair like a bird ready to flee. Vincent Moretti studied her with those dark, unreadable eyes. Up close, she could see the details, the faint scar above his left eyebrow, the tattoo that crept up his neck in serpentine patterns, the way his hands rested flat on the table with predatory calm. You said your mother had a ring like mine. His voice was conversational, almost friendly. Almost. I've been thinking about that statement, Miss Leone. All night, in fact. It's a curious thing to say. My ring is unique 16th century craftsmanship, commissioned for the Moretti family specifically. There are only 2 in existence. Maria's throat went dry. I must have been mistaken. Were you? He tilted his head slightly. Because I had someone look into you. Maria Elena Leone, 25, born in Queens. Mother, Isabella Russo Leone, deceased 3 years ago. Father, unknown, no siblings, no criminal record. You're a ghost, Miss Leone. Unremarkable, forgettable. Each word felt like a scalpel, precise and cutting. Except, he continued, leaning forward slightly, your mother wasn't born in New York. She was born in Naples. And before she became a struggling single mother in Queens, she was a singer, performed in some very exclusive clubs owned by very specific people. Maria's heart hammered against her ribs. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't you? Vincent's smile was cold and sharp. Here's what's going to happen. Tomorrow, 2 p.m., you're going to come to this address. He slid a black card across the table embossed with a gold lion's head. We're going to have a longer conversation about your mother, her ring, and why she never mentioned that she knew my family. And if I don't come? His smile widened, showing teeth. Then I'll have to assume you're hiding something worth hiding. And Miss Leone, in my experience, people who hide things from me tend to have heathens. He stood, buttoning his jacket with casual grace. Oh, and Maria? Bring the ring, the one your mother left you. I'd very much like to see it. He walked away, leaving Maria frozen in her chair, the black card burning in her hand like a brand. The address on the black card led Maria north, out of the city's concrete embrace and into the kind of wealth that didn't need to announce itself. The Hudson estate sprawled across manicured grounds like a sleeping predator, all stone and iron gates, ancient trees standing sentinel, windows that reflected the afternoon sun like watching eyes. Maria's hands gripped the steering wheel of her dying Honda so tightly her knuckles went white. The velvet box containing her mother's ring sat in her jacket pocket, a weight that felt heavier than gold and ruby had any right to feel. She could still turn around, drive back to the city, disappear into the anonymity of 8 million souls. But Vincent Moretti's words echoed in her mind. People who hide things from me tend to have accidents. The gate opened before she could announce herself, as if the estate had been expecting her, waiting for her. Maria drove up the long driveway, her heartbeat counting every second like a countdown to detonation. A man in a black suit met her at the entrance, one of the shadows from the restaurant, though he wore his menace more openly here. "Miss Leone, Mr. Moretti is waiting in the study. This way." The interior was a study in controlled opulence. Dark wood panels, oil paintings that looked centuries old, marble floors that swallowed the sound of her footsteps. Everything whispered legacy, power, blood. Maria felt like an intruder in a museum, touching things she had no right to touch. The study was all leather and mahogany, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, and a massive desk that looked like it had witnessed confessions and executions in equal measure. Vincent Moretti stood by the window, silhouetted against the afternoon light, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. "Miss Leone, punctual. I appreciate that." He turned, and the light caught his face sharp, calculating, and something else. Something that looked almost like anticipation? "You wanted to see me." Maria's voice was steadier than her hands. "I wanted answers." He moved to the desk, setting down his glass with deliberate care. "But first, let me show you something." He opened a drawer and pulled out a photograph, sliding it across the polished surface. Maria's breath caught. The photograph was old, the colors slightly faded, but the subjects were unmistakable. A younger woman, impossibly young, radiant and alive, stood on a stage bathed in spotlight. Dark hair cascading over her shoulders, a crimson dress that matched her lipstick, her mouth open in song. Behind her, seated at a private table, a silver-haired man in an expensive suit watched her with undisguised adoration. Maria's mother, Isabella. Before grief had hollowed her out, before secrets had eaten her alive from the inside. Naples, 1994, Club Vesuvio. Vincent's voice was clinical, but his eyes watched Maria's reaction like a scientist observing an experiment. The club was owned by Don Angelo Moretti, my grandfather, and that woman your mother performed there 6 nights a week for almost a year. Maria couldn't tear her eyes from the photograph. Her mother looked so alive, so different from the exhausted, pain-ridden woman who'd raised her in a Queens apartment that always smelled like medicine and regret. She was more than an employee, wasn't she? Maria's voice was barely a whisper. Vincent's silence was answer enough. He pulled out another photograph. This one showed Isabella and Don Angelo in an intimate moment, his hand on her cheek, her eyes closed, both of them suspended in something that looked dangerously like love. "My grandfather," Vincent said, his voice hardening, "was not a sentimental man. He built this family from blood and ambition. He didn't give gifts lightly. He didn't make promises he couldn't keep." He paused, his dark eyes boring into Maria's, and he certainly didn't commission matching lion's head rings for just anyone. Maria's hand moved unconsciously to her pocket, where the velvet box sat like a confession. "According to family records," Vincent continued, each word deliberate, "my grandfather died in 1995, shot 3 times in the chest during a supposed peace negotiation. My father, Luca Moretti, took control in the aftermath, consolidated power, built what you see today. What does this have to do with my mother?" Vincent's smile was cold and sharp as a blade. "Your mother disappeared from Naples 3 weeks before my grandfather died, vanished without a trace. No goodbye, no explanation, just gone." He leaned forward, bracing his hands on the desk. "Now, 30 years later, her daughter appears in my restaurant wearing her face and talking about a ring that should not exist." Maria pulled out the velvet box with trembling hands and set it on the desk between them. Vincent stared at it like she'd placed a live grenade in front of him. "Open it," Maria whispered. "See for yourself. 2 rings, 2 truths, and a secret that's been buried for 30 years is about to claw its way back into the light. Subscribe, because when Vincent opens that box, the past doesn't just return. It declares war." Vincent Moretti stared at the velvet box like it might bite him. For a long moment, he didn't move, didn't even seem to breathe. Then, with the careful precision of a man disarming a bomb, he reached out and opened it. The lion's head ring gleamed up at him, twin to the one on his finger, crimson ruby catching the light, Gold carved like feathers. Impossible, undeniable, real. Cristo, he whispered, the curse slipping out in Italian. His hand hovered over the ring but didn't touch it, as if contact would make it more real than he could handle. When he looked up at Maria, something had shifted in his expression, the cold calculation replaced by something raw. Where did she get this? I don't know. Maria's voice cracked. She never told me. She just kept it hidden, called it a curse. A curse. Vincent's laugh was bitter and sharp. My grandfather called them oaths, blood promises. He finally picked up the ring, holding it up to the light beside his own. Perfect mirrors. There were only supposed to be two, one for the dawn, one for... He stopped abruptly, his jaw tightening. For who? Maria pressed. For his heir. The words came out like an admission of guilt. His true heir. Not necessarily his son, but whoever he deemed worthy of the legacy. The implication hung between them like smoke. Maria felt the ground shifting beneath her feet, reality reorganizing itself into shapes she didn't recognize. Vincent set both rings on the desk, side by side. You need to leave. Now. And you need to forget you ever saw this ring. Forget this conversation. Forget. No. The word surprised Maria, as much as it seemed to surprise him. My mother died with secrets choking her. She'd wake up screaming, Mr. Moretti, nightmares about Naples, about blood, about promises she couldn't keep. I watched her waste away, and I never understood why. Her voice rose, 3 years of grief and confusion pouring out. You don't get to show me pieces of her life and then tell me to forget. I deserve the truth. The truth? Vincent's eyes flashed dangerously. The truth got my grandfather killed, Miss Leone. The truth has a body count you couldn't imagine. You want the truth? It'll bury you. Then let it. Maria stood, her legs shaking but her voice steady. I'm already drowning in questions. At least the truth would be solid ground. Maria's apartment felt smaller when she returned, the walls pressing in with the weight of everything unsaid. Vincent had let her leave reluctantly, with warnings that sounded like threats and instructions to stay invisible until he decided what to do with her. But Maria was done being invisible. She tore through her mother's belongings with renewed urgency, searching for anything she'd missed. Old bills, faded birthday cards, a broken watch, nothing that explained Naples or Don Angelo, or why her mother had fled with a ring worth more than kingdoms. Then, beneath a loose floorboard in her childhood bedroom, one she'd discovered at age 7 and forgotten about, her fingers brushed something unexpected. A shoebox, water-stained and brittle with age. Inside, cassette tapes. 4 of them, labeled in her mother's handwriting. Napoli, 1994. Per Maria quando sarà pronta. Naples, 1994. For Maria when she's ready. Maria's hands trembled as she dug out her mother's old tape player from the closet, praying it still worked. The batteries were corroded, but she found fresh ones, loaded the first tape with shaking fingers, and pressed play. Static. Then, her mother's voice younger, stronger, terrified. Maria, if you're hearing this, it means the past caught up. It means they found the ring, or you found them, and now you need to understand what I did, what I ran from. A long pause, the sound of her mother crying, muffled and broken. His name was Angelo, Don Angelo Moretti. I was 22, singing for tips, and he was. God. He was everything dangerous and beautiful about that city. He said I was his light in a world of shadows. Said he'd protect me from his life, keep me separate, safe. Another pause, the click of a lighter, her mother's shaky exhale. But you can't love a king and stay separate from his kingdom. I got pregnant, Maria. With you? And when Angelo found out, he gave me the ring, the lion's oath. He said you were his true heir, his daughter, his legacy. The tape hissed. Maria's vision blurred with tears. Then Luca, Angelo's son, found out about us. About you. 3 weeks later, Angelo was dead, shot by his own blood. And I ran. Mia cara. I ran with you in my belly and the ring in my pocket because Luca Moretti doesn't leave heirs alive. A gunshot cracked through the recording, distant but unmistakable. Her mother's scream. They're here. Maria, if you're listening, Vincent is Luca's son. He's your... The tape cut to static. Maria sat frozen, her mother's words echoing in the silence. Vincent is Luca's son. He's your... cousin. Half-brother. Family. The man who'd threatened her was her blood. Vincent Moretti didn't sleep well anymore. He'd learned years ago that sleep was a luxury afforded to men with clean consciences, and his had been stained black since he was old enough to understand what his father's empire was built on. But tonight was different. Tonight, he didn't even try. He sat in his study, the 2 lion's head rings placed side by side on his desk like pieces of evidence at a trial. The lion on his ring seemed to glare at its twin with accusation. You were never supposed to exist. His phone buzzed at 2:47 a.m. Marco, his right hand, his oldest friend, the only person Vincent trusted with the family's darkest corners. Tell me you found something. Vincent's voice was gravel and exhaustion. Boss, you're not going to like this. Marco's hesitation spoke volumes. I dug into Isabella Russo. Hospital records from Street Vincent's in Manhattan. 1995. She gave birth to a daughter 7 months after leaving Naples. Vincent's grip tightened on the phone. And? There's a notation in the medical file, blood work for the infant. The doctor ordered specialized testing because the mother was concerned about paternity and inheritance factors. Those records were sealed, but I found someone who could access them. Marco. Vincent's voice dropped to something dangerous. What did you find? A long pause. Then, DNA markers consistent with southern Italian lineage, specifically Campania region. And boss, the blood type. AB negative. Same as your grandfather. Same as you. The world tilted. Vincent closed his eyes, but all he could see was Maria's face, those eyes that had seemed familiar in a way he couldn't place. The shape of her jaw, the way she held herself with unconscious pride even when she was terrified. There's more, Marco continued. I pulled Angelo's private records, the ones your father kept locked away. There's a letter, dated 3 weeks before Angelo died. He wrote it to his lawyer, never sent. It mentions Isabella by name, and refers to my unborn heir. Boss, he knew. Angelo knew Isabella was pregnant, with his child. Vincent's voice was barely a whisper. Yeah, which means Maria Leone is my grandfather's daughter. Vincent stood abruptly, the chair scraping across marble. She's not just connected to the past. She is the past. She's the legitimate heir my father murdered Angelo to prevent. The implications crashed over him like a wave. His entire life, his inheritance, his empire, all of it built on his father's betrayal. And the proof had just walked into his restaurant wearing a waitress uniform and her grandfather's face. Vincent arrived at Maria's apartment building at dawn, Marco flanking him with the kind of alert tension that said he'd come prepared for violence. The building was a study in managed decay, the kind of place where people survived rather than lived. He knocked. Once, twice. The door opened a crack, chain still attached. Maria's eyes were red-rimmed, exhausted, but when she saw him, something hardened in her expression. Come to finish what your father started? Her voice was steady despite the exhaustion. Vincent felt something twist in his chest. You know, I found tapes, my mother's confession. Maria's laugh was bitter. Congratulations, Mr. Moretti. Turns out we're family. Isn't that cozy? Let me in, please. Why? So you can kill the inconvenient heir in her own home instead of on the street? Very classy. Maria. He used her first name without thinking. If I wanted you dead, you'd be dead. I'm here because... He stopped, the words catching in his throat. Because you deserve to know everything. The chain rattled. The door opened. Maria's apartment was barely larger than his closet, but it was clean, organized, desperately maintained. The kind of space that spoke of pride in the face of poverty. She'd been crying, the evidence was in the crumpled tissues. The tape player sitting on the coffee table surrounded by cassettes like archaeological evidence. Your mother left you tapes. It wasn't a question. 4 of them. I've listened to 3. Maria's voice cracked. She loved him. Your grandfather. She said he was going to leave the family. Start over with her. With me. Her eyes met his, blazing with grief and fury. Then your father shot him 3 times in the chest and took everything. Vincent felt something cold settle in his stomach. My father told me Angelo died in a peace negotiation gone wrong. A rival family. Your father lied. Maria grabbed a cassette and threw it at him. He caught it reflexively. Listen to it. Hear her scream when they came for her. Hear the gunshots. That's your legacy, Vincent. That's what you inherited. He stared at the cassette in his hand, feeling the weight of 30 years of carefully constructed lies beginning to crumble. There's a 4th tape, Maria whispered. I haven't listened to it yet. I wanted. Her voice broke. I wanted to know if you'd tell me the truth before I heard hers. Vincent met her eyes and saw his grandfather staring back, the same fierce intelligence, the same refusal to bow. "Then let's hear it together," he said quietly. "And whatever it says, whatever it means, we face it as what we are." "And what's that?" "Blood," Vincent said. "The only thing my family has ever truly understood. 2 heirs, 1 empire built on murder, and a 4th tape that might destroy everything Vincent thought he knew. Subscribe, because the truth isn't just dangerous anymore. It's about to become a reckoning." The 4th tape sat between them on Maria's coffee table like a live grenade, black plastic housing secrets neither of them was ready to face. Vincent broke the silence first. "Before we listen to that, there's something I need to tell you." His voice was rough, stripped of its usual command. "My father, Luca, he's still alive. In a private care facility upstate, Alzheimer's. Most days he doesn't remember his own name." He paused, his jaw tightening. "But some days he remembers everything. And on those days he talks about Angelo, about the night he died." Maria's breath caught. "What does he say?" "That it had to be done. That Angelo had become weak, compromised by a woman. That he was going to destroy everything our family built by legitimizing a bastard." Vincent's hands clenched into fists. "He never mentioned your mother by name, never admitted she was pregnant. But the way he talked about the singer who needed to disappear." His voice trailed off, thick with implications. "He tried to kill her." Maria's words weren't a question. "Yes." Thunder cracked outside, sudden and violent. The first drops of rain began to patter against the window, and Maria stood abruptly. "I need air. I need to." She looked around her tiny apartment like it was a cage. My mother's house, her real house, the one she owned before the medical bills. It's been empty for 3 years. I couldn't afford to keep it, but I couldn't sell it either. It's in foreclosure limbo. "Take me there," Vincent said immediately. "Why?" "Because if Isabella kept tapes hidden in your childhood bedroom, she might have hidden other things in the place she actually considered home." The house was in Queens, a small brick 2-story that had probably been charming once but now sagged with neglect. The lawn was overgrown, windows dark, the whole structure holding its breath like it was waiting for someone to remember it existed. Maria's hands shook as she unlocked the door. The air inside was stale, thick with dust and abandonment. Furniture sat beneath sheets like ghosts, and the silence was so complete it felt accusatory. "Her bedroom was upstairs," Maria whispered, though there was no one to overhear. They climbed creaking stairs to a master bedroom that still smelled faintly of her mother's perfumed lavender and something darker, more complex. Vincent stood in the doorway while Maria began searching with the systematic desperation of someone who'd done this before. She was paranoid, Maria said, pulling open drawers that were already empty. Always checking locks, looking over her shoulder. "I thought it was the morphine, making her anxious. But it wasn't drugs. It was memory. Survivor's instinct," Vincent said quietly. "She knew my father's reach, knew he never forgot debts or threats." Maria dropped to her knees beside the bed, running her fingers along the floorboards the way her mother used to when she thought Maria wasn't watching. One board, slightly warped, gave under pressure. "Vincent," her voice was barely audible. He crossed the room in 3 strides and knelt beside her. Together, they pried up the loose board. Beneath it, wrapped in oilcloth to protect against moisture, was a metal lockbox. Maria's hands trembled as she opened it. Inside, photographs, letters tied with string, and a thick envelope with her name written in her mother's handwriting. "Per Maria, la mia leonessa, la verità che merita." For Maria, my little lioness, the truth she deserves. With shaking fingers, Maria opened the envelope. Several letters fell out, but one landed on top, more recent than the others. Dated just days before her mother died. "My darling Maria, if you're reading this, the ring found its way back to them. The man who wears it carries my curse, my grief, my greatest love's legacy. You are the last Leone born from blood that was stolen, from a love that was murdered. Angelo gave me the lion's oath the night I told him I was pregnant. He said you were his redemption, his chance to build something clean from something stained. He was going to leave it all, the family, the power, the blood money. We were going to disappear to Sicily, raise you where the olive trees grow and the past couldn't find us. But Luca found out, and 3 weeks later, I ran from Naples with you in my belly and Angelo's blood on my dress. You are Angelo Moretti's daughter, Maria, the rightful heir to everything they stole. The lion's oath proves it. Matching rings were only made for the Don and his chosen successor. I kept you hidden, kept you small and invisible, because Luca Moretti doesn't leave heirs alive. But I'm dying now, and soon you'll be alone. If Vincent finds you, remember this. He's Luca's son, but he's also Angelo's grandson. Blood recognizes blood. The man who wears the other ring, he's your cousin, your enemy, your only living family. Trust the lion, my love. It knows the truth even when men lie. Con tutto il mio cuore. Mama. Lightning flashed, illuminating Vincent's face. Shock, recognition, and something that looked devastatingly like grief. Cousin, he said hoarsely. All this time, and we're blood, Maria finished, tears streaming down her face. The only thing your family ever understood. Outside, thunder roared like a lion's challenge, and in Maria's hand, her mother's ring gleamed with the promise of vengeance 30 years overdue. The rain hammered against Vincent's car as they drove through the deserted industrial district along the Hudson. It was past midnight, the kind of hour when New York belonged to shadows and people who had business with them. Why are we doing this here? Maria clutched her mother's letters in one hand, both lion's head rings wrapped in her other. She'd insisted on bringing them both. Your estate, your office, anywhere would be safer than. Nowhere is safe. Vincent's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. Not anymore. I called Marco to bring Angelo's private documents, the originals my father kept locked away. If we're going to do this, if we're going to prove your claim, we need everything in one place. Prove my claim to who? Vincent's silence was answer enough. To everyone. To the families who'd bow to strength but devour weakness. To the FBI who'd been circling the Moretti empire for years. To history itself. The warehouse loomed ahead, abandoned, skeletal. The perfect neutral ground for a meeting that could end in either alliance or assassination. Marco's car was already there, headlights cutting through the rain. Vincent parked and turned to Maria, his expression harder than she'd ever seen it. Whatever happens in there, whatever I have to say or do, remember that we're blood. Remember that changes everything. Does it? Maria's voice was sharp with fear and fury. Your father murdered mine. Your empire is built on my family's grave. Does blood actually mean anything to people like you? Something flickered in Vincent's eyes, pain. Maybe. Or recognition. We're about to find out. The warehouse interior was vast and empty, their footsteps echoing on concrete. Marco stood in the center beneath a flickering utility light, a leather briefcase at his feet. But he wasn't alone. 3 other men emerged from the shadows, capos, Maria realized, lieutenants in the Moretti organization. Their expressions ranged from curious to hostile, and every one of them had a hand near their jacket. Boss. Marco's voice was tight with warning. Word travels fast. When I pulled Angelo's files, people noticed. They wanted to know why. So you brought them here. Vincent's tone could have cut glass. I brought them because they need to hear this from you. Marco gestured to the briefcase, before someone else tells them a different story. Vincent moved to the center of the warehouse, and Maria realized with sudden clarity what was happening. This wasn't just about truth, it was about power, about control, about whether Vincent Moretti would protect his family's lie or expose it. 30 years ago, Vincent began, his voice carrying through the space like a prosecutor's. My grandfather, Don Angelo Moretti, was murdered. The official story is that it was a rival family during a peace negotiation. That story is a lie. The capos shifted. Marco's expression remained neutral, but his hand moved away from his jacket, a gesture of trust. My father, Luca Moretti, killed Angelo. Shot him 3 times because Angelo had fallen in love with a woman named Isabella Russo. Because she was pregnant with his child. Because Angelo was planning to legitimize that child, his daughter, and leave the family to start over. One of the capos, silver-haired and scarred, spoke up. That's a serious accusation, Vincent. Against your own father. It's the truth. Vincent pulled out his phone. Played the audio from Isabella's 3rd tape, the gunshots, her screams, the unmistakable sound of betrayal and murder. The warehouse filled with the ghosts of that night. When it ended, the silence was absolute. This is Maria Leone, Vincent continued, gesturing to her. Isabella's daughter. Angelo's daughter. His rightful heir, marked with the lion's oath that my father tried to bury along with her mother. Maria stepped forward, her legs shaking, and placed both rings on an overturned crate between them. The gold gleamed under the flickering light. Twin lions facing each other across 3 decades of lies. The matching rings, Marco breathed. Jesus, boss. They're real. They're real, Vincent confirmed. Which means everything we've built. Everything my father claimed it was stolen from her. The scarred capo pulled his gun. Everything happened at once. Marco moved to intercept. Vincent stepped in front of Maria. The other two capos drew weapons, and from somewhere in the shadows a new voice cut through the chaos. "Lower your weapons, all of you." A figure emerged into the light older, impeccably dressed, with the kind of authority that didn't need to be armed to be dangerous. Maria recognized him from Vincent's office. Antonio Carbone, the consigliere, the family's oldest advisor. "I was there," Antonio said quietly, "the night Angelo died. I watched Luca pull the trigger, and I've spent 30 years waiting for this moment." His eyes found Maria's, and something like relief crossed his weathered face. "Benvenuta a casa, Principessa. Welcome home." The scarred capo's gun wavered. "Antonio, you can't be serious. She's Angelo's blood, which makes her more Moretti than any of us." Antonio turned to Vincent. "The question is, what are you going to do about it?" Vincent met Maria's eyes across the space between them, and she saw the calculation, the conflict, the impossible choice. Then he did something that shocked them all. He picked up Angelo's ring and held it out to Maria. "The lion's oath recognizes its true heir," he said clearly. "It's not mine to wear. It never was." Before Maria could take it, glass shattered. Gunfire erupted from the warehouse entrance. The scarred capo dropped, blood blooming across his chest. Someone screamed. Marco returned fire, shouting orders. Vincent grabbed Maria and pulled her behind a concrete pillar as bullets tore through the space they'd just occupied. "It's my father's men," Vincent growled, shielding her with his body. "They must have followed Marco. They know. Then we're dead." Maria's voice was surprisingly steady. "No." Vincent pressed the ring into her palm, his hand covering hers. "You're the heir. You survive. That's all that matters." More gunfire. A grunt of pain Marco hit. The warehouse filling with smoke and cordite and the sound of an empire tearing itself apart. And Maria, clutching both rings, realized that surviving wasn't enough anymore. She wanted vengeance. The gunfire stopped as suddenly as it started, leaving only the ringing silence of aftermath and the metallic smell of blood. Maria's ears buzzed, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. Vincent's weight pressed against her, protective and immovable. "Stay down," he breathed against her ear. But Maria was done staying down, done being small, done being invisible. She pushed against his chest, and when he looked at her, she saw her own defiance reflected in his eyes. Understanding passed between them, cousin to cousin, heir to heir. They rose together. The warehouse looked like a war zone. Marco was wounded but alive, pressing his hand against a shoulder injury while Antonio tended to him. Two of the capos were down, one dead, one dying. And near the entrance, 3 bodies in suits that didn't belong to Vincent's men lay in spreading pools of crimson. "Luca's people," Antonio confirmed grimly. "The old guard, the ones who helped him kill Angelo and thought that secret died with them. How many more?" Vincent's voice was ice and calculation. "Enough to make this a problem." Antonio's expression was grave. "Word is out, Vincent. About the girl, the rings, Angelo's heir. You've got maybe 12 hours before this becomes a full civil war within the family. Those loyal to Luca's memory versus those who remember Angelo." Vincent turned to Maria, and she saw the weight of impossible decisions pressing down on him. "You need to disappear. I can get you out of the country. Set you up somewhere they'll never." "No." Maria's voice cut through his planning like a blade. "I'm done running. My mother spent 30 years running, and it killed her slowly from the inside. I won't do the same. Then you'll die quickly instead." Vincent shot back. "You don't understand what you're up against. These men, they don't negotiate, they don't forgive, they don't expect me to fight back." Maria pulled both rings from her pocket, holding them up to the flickering light. The twin lions glared with ruby eyes, promises made in gold. "But that's exactly what I'm going to do." The next 72 hours moved with the terrible momentum of an avalanche. Maria didn't hide. Instead, she did something that terrified Vincent's entire organization. She went public. Not to the police, that would have been suicide, but to the one entity that scared organized crime more than federal raids, the media. Specifically, investigative journalists who'd spent careers trying to crack the Moretti empire. In a hotel room downtown, with Vincent and Antonio flanking her like grim sentinels, Maria told her story, showed the rings, played portions of her mother's tapes, edited carefully, but damning nonetheless. Presented the documents Marco had pulled. Angelo's letter about his unborn heir, medical records, dated photographs. "My name is Maria Leone," she said to 3 cameras and a dozen recording devices. "I'm the daughter of Isabella Russo and Don Angelo Moretti. For 30 years, My existence was erased by men who built an empire on my grandfather's murder. Today, I'm taking it back. The story went viral within hours. National news picked it up by evening. By midnight, federal agents had subpoenas ready for every Moretti business, every account, every property. Vincent watched his father's empire crack like ice in spring. The FBI raid came at dawn, coordinated, massive, devastating. They hit the shipping companies, the construction firms, the restaurants and legitimate businesses that had served as fronts for decades of carefully laundered blood money. Vincent stood on the balcony of his Hudson estate, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of fire, while federal helicopters circled like carrion birds. His phone hadn't stopped ringing, capos calling with panic or rage, business partners demanding answers, lawyers advising surrender. Maria found him there, exhausted but unbowed. She'd barely slept, had spent the night in protective custody giving statements that would bury what remained of Luca Moretti's legacy. They arrested 15 people overnight, she said quietly. Antonio turned himself in. He's cooperating, says he's been waiting 30 years to tell the truth. Marco's in surgery, but he'll survive. She paused. They're coming for you next, Vincent. I know. His voice was surprisingly calm. The empire's done. Everything my father built. Everything I inherited. It's ash now. Are you angry? Maria asked. That I destroyed it? Vincent turned to look at her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. Angry? No. My grandfather would have done the same. Burned it all down rather than let a lie wear the crown. He pulled the lion's head ring from his finger, the one he'd worn for 10 years thinking it made him legitimate, and held it out to her. This was never mine to keep. It was only mine to return. Maria took it with shaking hands, then reached for her mother's ring in her pocket. Both rings together, both lions reunited. What happens now? She whispered. Vincent's smile was bitter and free. Now we see if blood can mean something other than violence. If legacy can be redemption instead of a curse. Below them, car doors slammed. Federal agents approaching. The end of the old world. They'll arrest you, Maria said. Probably. I've done enough to deserve it. Vincent looked at her with something that might have been pride. But you're clean. Angelo's heir. Uncorrupted by what came after. You get to decide what the Moretti name means now. The doorbell rang. Authoritative. Final. I won't abandon you, Maria said fiercely. We're family. Blood. Blood. Vincent agreed. Then quieter. The only thing that mattered in the end. He walked toward the door to face his reckoning, and Maria stood on the balcony, clutching 2 gold rings, watching an empire fall and wondering what rises from ashes. The empire has fallen. Vincent faces justice. But Maria stands at the center of the ruins with 2 rings and a choice. Walk away from her bloodline forever, or reclaim it and build something new from her grandfather's dream. Subscribe, because this isn't about revenge anymore. It's about rebirth. 6 months later. The Sicilian coast stretched endlessly before Maria, azure waters meeting cloudless sky in a seam of gold. The breeze carried the scent of wild herbs and salt, and for the first time in her life, she understood what her mother had meant when she whispered about peace in her morphine dreams. Maria stood before a modest headstone in a small cemetery overlooking the Mediterranean. The inscription was simple: Isabella Russo, Moretti. Itenzio by Tishar da Leantianling Arshar. Beloved mother, eternal lioness. La verità vive oltre la morte. The truth lives beyond death. She'd moved her mother's body here, to the land Isabella had fled from but never stopped loving, close to where Angelo was buried in an unmarked grave together now in death as they'd been denied in life. Maria knelt, placing fresh flowers on the stone, her fingers brushing the marble with reverence. On her right hand, she wore both lion's head rings on a chain around her neck too large for her fingers, but close to her heart where they belonged. I did it, Mama, she whispered in Italian, the language feeling more natural now after months of immersion. I told the truth. Just like you asked. The wind picked up, warm and alive, and Maria chose to believe it was her mother's answer. The fallout had been catastrophic and cleansing in equal measure. Vincent was serving 15 years in a federal facility not for his grandfather's murder, which he hadn't committed, but for the crimes he had committed in his father's name. Racketeering, money laundering, conspiracy. He'd pled guilty to spare his people harsher sentences, and Maria visited him monthly. They played chess through plexiglass and talked about what legacy meant when you couldn't run from it or hide behind it. You're rebuilding, he'd said during her last visit, something like wonder in his voice. Actually rebuilding. And she was. The Moretti Empire had collapsed, but from its ashes, Maria had taken what was legitimate, the properties, the businesses that didn't run on blood money, and transformed them. Restaurants became community centers. Warehouses became affordable housing. Money that had been laundered clean was invested cleaner still, in schools and medical clinics and futures that didn't require looking over your shoulder. She'd renamed it all. Leone Foundation. The Lioness's legacy. Antonio had helped, even from prison. Marco, recovered from his injuries, had become her unlikely right-hand reformed enforcer turned community organizer. Together, they were writing a different story for the Moretti name. For the Leone name. For blood that refused to be only a curse. Maria walked down the hillside to a small villa she'd purchased overlooking the sea, modest by Mafia standards, palatial by Waitress standards. Inside, the walls were covered with photographs. Her mother singing in Naples, young and radiant. Angelo watching Isabella with undisguised devotion. Maria herself at 25, standing before federal agents with 2 gold rings and the truth. Her phone buzzed. A message from Sophie, back in New York. The center opens next week. Wish you were here for the ribbon cutting. We're naming it Isabella's Place. Maria smiled through tears. Her mother's name on a building dedicated to helping struggling single mothers with medical bills. The kind of place that might have saved Isabella's life, given her options beyond running and hiding. I'll be there, Maria typed back. Wouldn't miss it. Another message came through, this one from an unknown number. The lion sleeps tonight, but she never stops watching. Well done, Principessa. A friend of your grandfather's. Maria had learned in these months that Angelo's reach had been vast, that there were old guard members who'd respected him, who'd been waiting decades for someone worthy to reclaim his vision. They emerged from shadows occasionally, offering advice, protection, resources. She didn't always accept, but she listened. Learning to wield influence without violence was an art form, and she was still an apprentice. But she was learning. That evening, Maria returned to her mother's grave as the sun set, painting the Mediterranean in shades of crimson and gold. She held the 2 rings up to the dying light, watching the lion's ruby eyes catch fire. It began with a waitress who spoke a truth she didn't understand, Maria said softly, her voice carried away by the sea breeze. And it ended with a lioness who ruled the ashes of men. Not through violence, but through the only thing stronger than fear. She clasped the rings tight, feeling their weight, their history, their promise. Truth, Mama. The truth you died protecting. The truth that set us all free. The sun slipped below the horizon, and darkness came, but it wasn't the heavy darkness of secrets and lies. It was the soft darkness of endings that promise new beginnings. Maria turned from the grave and walked toward the villa, toward the life she was building from blood and gold, and the stubborn refusal to let her mother's sacrifice mean nothing. Behind her, carved into Isabella's headstone, where the last light touched it, the inscription glowed, "The truth lives beyond death." And in Sicily, where the old world met the new, where the Mediterranean whispered secrets to the shore, a new legend was born. They called her La Leone, the lioness, daughter of a murdered Don and a singer who refused to die forgotten, heir to an empire she'd torn down to rebuild correctly. A woman who'd learned that the most dangerous power wasn't the kind that came from fear, it was the kind that came from knowing exactly who you were and refusing to apologize for it. The lion had risen, and her roar echoed across generations, across oceans, across blood and betrayal, and the unshakable truth that some legacies refuse to die. They just wait for the right heir to claim them. Thanks for sticking with this story till the end. If you enjoyed it, you're going to love the next one. It's packed with unexpected turns and heartfelt moments. Click the image on your screen to keep the journey going, and make sure to hit subscribe for more amazing stories. Drop a comment and rate this story from 1 to 10. I can't wait to see what you think.